Hello everyone and welcome to today's Tech Talk on Web Components, the future of reusable UI. I am Ayush and I'll be walking you through what web components are and why they matter and how you can use them in modern web development. By the end of this talk, you will have a solid understanding of how web components can be leveraged inside your projects, whether you are using React, Angular, Vue, or just even plain HTML and JavaScript. So, let's jump in. What are web components? So, before we jump into the technical details, let's first define what web components actually are and let's get to know them better. So, web components are a native browser technology that allows us to create reusable and self-contained UI components. Unlike other frameworks like React, Vue, or Angular, web components are not tied to any specific library. They are built using pure web standards, making them framework agnostic. So, if you create a web component today, it can be used inside a React project, an Angular application, or even just plain HTML without any modifications. So these are the three key benefits of using web components. Encapsulation. So here the styles and logics are scoped to the components so that they doesn't leak out, and we will get to them later on. Reusability. You can use them across different projects and frameworks as I already mentioned. And then there is interoperability where it works natively inside the browser without any extra dependencies. In short, web components allows us to build reusable UI elements that work everywhere. So you guys might be wondering, why should we use web components when we have powerful frameworks like React, Angular, etc. So why do we need them? Let's have a small comparison between them. Web components are easily reusable so that it can be used across any framework and it's not tied to a specific framework. It has better performance since it has native browser support, and it has styles encapsulated inside of them so that the styles does not conflict with the styles or with the global styles, and there is no extra dependencies for that. So for example, if you are building a UI design system by using web components, you can use the same buttons, inputs, and models inside a React application, Angular application, or a Vue app without rewriting any one of them. This is what makes web components an ideal choice for large-scale projects where teams work across different frameworks. Web components kind of runs natively inside the browser, making them more efficient compared to framework-based components that rely highly on a virtual DOM. So, what are the three building blocks of web components? The major one is custom elements. This kind of allows us to define the new HTML elements. For example, we can create an element called myButton. Instead of using the button tag, we can directly use myButton tag, and then we can define these elements using JavaScript classes itself. So we can kind of tell the browser about any specific element that we need to build, which is our custom element, and then the browser can directly render that. And the second one is Shadow DOM. Shadow DOM kind of provides style encapsulation, preventing CSS conflicts. So this is where I mentioned that the CSS doesn't leak out. The Shadow DOM kind of ensures that the component style doesn't leak out to the rest of the page. Then there is HTML templates and slots. This kinds of allows us to create reusable component structures. So slots kind of act like placeholders for a dynamic content. Slots only shows a default value when there is nothing passed through, and it gets replaced when the component class successfully executes. So then let's jump in and see how to create a small web component. So here is a code example of creating a web component. This kind of extends the HTML element inside the class, and then inside the constructor we just add the inner HTML and attach it to the shadow node, and inside the inner HTML we can add anything that is possible. And then there is how we define the custom element, that is just custom elements dot define and my component. This creates a simple custom HTML tag for my component called my component. And then there is another way to create web components using LitElement. Why do we need to use LitElement? So using LitElement, it's a better way to create web components. It's a very lightweight library that simplifies the whole process. It makes web components very easy to write. It provides built-in reactivity and templating, handles rendering more efficiently. So it's a much easier way to write the code and for it to work. So let's see how we can write a simple counter component using LitElement. So this is how we can create a counter component using LitElement. We just import LitElement and HTML CSS from lit. Those are the three things that we primarily need. Then we extend the LitElement inside the class, and then we add the property kinds of act like the state variables, and we can change it, and then the re-rendering will occur. So inside the render part, we render our HTML part or whatever we need to render, and that's it. We can just create a custom element by defining the name of the component and the component. So here we have defined a component called myCounter. So this creates a reusable myCounter element that can update the counter value. And how do we use it inside the projects? So we can use it inside a React application by wrapping this inside a custom React component, or inside Vue, they treat the web components just as native elements, so we can directly use them. Inside Angular, we can just modify the ng module and just make a small modifications. And in plain HTML, we can directly import the scripts and then use web components directly. So this is how we can use the web component inside an HTML file and inside React. Inside the HTML file, we can directly use it as the counter tag, my counter tag, and inside React, we can import it and directly use it in camel case itself, since we exported it like that. Web components versus React. So here reusability. The web components can be used in any framework, whereas while we create something using React, it can only be used in React applications. And performance. Web components are faster and it has a native support, whereas React has virtual DOM overhead. And the styling here is kind of like a shadow DOM encapsulated style so that it doesn't leak out. The major disadvantage is that we don't have a built-in state management. Like React has hooks and context APIs. And learning web components is actually simple. It's very easy. And web components are properly ideal for cross-framework UI libraries and widgets, where the widgets needs to be used inside multiple places or multiple projects. Whereas React is kind of useful for a fully fledged web application, which requires more major state management and stuff. Then we can see some real world use cases of web components. Google has YouTube, where YouTube kind of uses web components for the UI. Salesforce has their Lightning web components, Adobe has Spectrum web components, IBM kind of developed Carbon, and we can see that many companies are already taken their path towards web components. And when do we need to use the web components? As I already said, web components are best used for UI libraries and design systems. So we can see major design systems using web components. One of the most common one is material web components. Then there is widgets that needs to be used across different platforms. We can also use web components for them. Since its cross-framework compatibility is huge, then multiple teams using different technology can actually use them. However, they are not much ideal for apps that requires advanced state management. Like Vue, Angular or React would be much suited for that. So kind of here is the conclusion. Web components are kind of like the future of reusable UI. They work across different frameworks and browsers, as I already mentioned. The Shadow DOM provides encapsulation and style isolation so that the styles doesn't leak out. Templates and slots enhance the flexibility and reusability of the code. LitElement uses makes our development much easier and it is much more efficient. This is ideal for cross-framework components and design systems. So web components are the future of reusable UI. And that's it from me today. Bye bye.